Herdwick sheep are the most important breed of sheep in the world, and that sounds daft, but it is totally true. They came here originally about 1,000 years ago with the Vikings. This whole landscape that you're looking at behind us was made by Herdwick sheep. It's probably the most important cultural landscape in the English-speaking world. It's the most written about place in English literature. Written about by Wordsworth, Beatrix Potter, Coleridge, a whole bunch of other people. And it occupies a really, really important part in the heart of English people when they think about landscapes, and it's all because of these sheep. So they came on boats about 1,000 years ago with the Vikings. Their other ancestors were possibly here 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So it's one of the oldest farming systems in the world. It's hopefully about to be recognised by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site because of these amazing things that have happened here. But maybe the biggest and most important thing that Herdwick sheep have been involved in is that they changed conservation all around the world. So the early conservationists here had to deal with the Industrial Revolution before anybody else in the world did. It happened 2 hours down the road in Lancashire. And the threats that came from the Industrial Revolution to this landscape led people to want to protect it. And they didn't just want to protect it as a wild landscape, they wanted to protect it as a cultural landscape because of the small farmers in it. So Wordsworth wrote about a perfect republic of shepherds. He thought the way that people farmed here was really, really important, and he thought the small farmers here with the strong tenure of their own and ownership of their land was a really important thing, and the aristocratic elites that were important elsewhere didn't have very much power in the Lake District, because what you're looking at is the biggest area of common land in Western Europe. It's an amazing place, and Herdwick sheep are right at the centre of it. Herdwick sheep in themselves are amazing. They're probably the only breed of sheep in the world that can live on those mountains through the winter. They're not the coldest or the snowiest mountains in the world, but they are some of the dampest, coldest mountains in the world. So 3, 4, 5 months it'd be very, very cold and wet up there. And the combination of cold and wet kills most breed of sheep, kill most animals. But these sheep have been selectively bred and adapted in this area to cope with that. And they're really tough, so they have that thick wiry wool that the rain pours off. Doesn't matter how bad it is, the rain hardly ever gets to the bottom of a Herdwick's fleece. And beneath the thick wiry bit is a downy layer of softer wool. And yeah, these are amazingly tough sheep, and they've had to be tough. So evolution is still at work in those fells. If they don't survive the winter, they're dead, they're gone. So if you can imagine that lasting for 5,000 years, you end up with incredibly tough sheep that are suited to here better than any other kind of sheep. There are particular challenges to living in those mountains, things like we have ticks in the mountains that carry particular kinds of diseases. The sheep that go to those mountains have adapted and survived to cope with those things. So yeah, if I bring a modern lowland breed from France or the Netherlands or somewhere and I stick it up on those fells, it's only going to last 5 minutes. Yes, those things grow more quickly, but that's not the point. The first job of these sheep is to survive in tough weather in those mountains, and the second job is to be productive living in that tough environment. So they not only survive in those fells, but they fetch hopefully a lamb or 2 lambs each off those fells in the autumn in October, and that enables me to sell something and live and survive, and it enables us to produce one of the world's great meats. In the background on the fells, you're looking at the biggest area of common land in Western Europe, so there are no fences on those mountains that you're looking at all. The whole farming system relies on something really special and almost unique to Herdwick sheep, which is that they're hefted. And hefted means that the mother takes its daughter or son back to a particular place on this mountain, a very, very specific part of the mountain, and teaches that lamb in its first summer that that's the place it must always go back to, must always hold to. So even without fences, my flock, 98% of my flock will not stray from their place on the mountain. And that's because there's this unbroken chain of being hefted to that place on the mountain or the fell that possibly goes back 5,000 years. There's an unbroken genetic legacy through these sheep that we believe goes back at least 1,000 years and may go back 4,000 or 5,000 years. And that's culturally unique as well as sort of genetically unique. Because there are no fences on those mountains, because it's a vast expanse of common land, it means that all of the different flocks that are up there and the shepherds have to collaborate on the key work of the year, like gathering the fells. So on gathering my fell, which is the snowy bit in the middle of that mountain chain behind us, there are 10 flocks, 10 different flocks on that piece of fell. And the 10 different shepherds or families of shepherds all have to collaborate to gather that mountain. So when we go, it takes us 2 days, and it takes about 10 people and about 22, 25 dogs. to bring those sheep off that mountain, and that's just about 20% of what you're looking at in the background. So what's behind me in the distance is a sort of vast patchwork of land that's farmed communally. And we manage it communally and have a unique culture about how we work together and collaborate, which is utterly unknown to most farmers in most of England and most of the rest of the world. My own family, a little bit like many of the other Herdwick and fell farming families, is probably hefted as well. So a few years ago we tried to do a family tree and we discovered we'd been nowhere and and we've been in the same area just about 3 miles away. We were here 600 years ago. And I don't think that means we came here 600 years ago. I think it was just that the paperwork ran out 600 years ago, so we were probably here much longer than that. And if you talk to many of the people that farm Herdwick sheep or the fell farmers here, you'll find people who are incredibly rooted. And many of the families are interconnected and go back together a very, very long time. And we joke here that Cumbrians can't really leave Cumbria. They sometimes disappear for a few years, but they nearly always come back because there's such a strong sense of being rooted and belonging in this particular place. Following my grandfather around and my father around, doing the work that I now do. So it's very nice that my son and my daughters follow me around and get to experience this life as well. We realise we're very, very lucky as a family. We live in a beautiful place and we have a lot of space around us and we get to do something that we enjoy and we care about very much. I have no idea whether my children will want to or be able to carry on this way of life in the future. And that doesn't keep me awake at night. I'm just very pleased that they get to experience it when they're young and they're going to know what kind of people we are and where we came from. And if they go and do other things, I'll be very happy. I think they can take it with them in their heads and their hearts, and it'll be part of who they are. Instead of living on a sort of lowland green field with one species of grass, these sheep actually live on the mountains. So they live up on the skyline for most of the year, where the snow is, and they're eating moss and heather and berries and all sorts of things up there which give their meat a unique flavour. They're basically living a half-wild lifestyle, and their lambs are almost never see a human for much of their life because they're living up in the mountains. So this is a really unique product with a unique story and a unique flavour. Farming's never been more important. There is a school of thought that says we should all eat cheap industrial chicken grown in vast industrial sheds. Actually, I think this kind of farming matters. By using native breeds that have been selectively bred over many, many centuries to live in certain places, it's a very sustainable way to farm in that you're producing with very few inputs the food that a community needs to live in a certain place. We use almost no pesticides, almost no antibiotics. It could hardly be more natural, and long after some of the more intensive ways of farming that we use at the moment have died, people will go back to using these traditional breeds and farming with very few inputs in a more sustainable way. And I'm totally convinced that this has never mattered more than it does now. To be a shepherd here, you need good dogs. If you haven't got good dogs, you're not a shepherd, you're no use to anybody. You can't gather the mountains, so a huge part of being a shepherd is working with your sheepdogs. A lot of the shepherds here joke that if they had to choose between the wives and the dogs, the wives would have to pack the bags and go. And it's just about true with our house as well, isn't it, Tan? Where they become a vital part of your life, and you're less in with them working here. They make everything look easy. But if I came with 5 or 6 people and tried to do the same job, we would get nowhere. And if we went to gather our common and we had 200 people, we wouldn't come down with all of the sheep, but 10 people with 20 dogs can do it no problem. So they become like an extension of your hand and your brain. My dogs on a good day know what I'm thinking before I even say it, and they can work remotely, they can hunt sheep out of crags. A huge part of being a shepherd. It's all about the sheep, it's all about the dogs, it's not really about you if you're a shepherd. I'm very proud to be one of the 200 or 300 families that keep this landscape going. I know there are other interesting things to do in the world, but none that mean as much to me. I love this life and I love doing what I do, and I'm very proud to try and keep going what my father and my grandfather and all those other people going back 600 plus years have done. My sense of self and identity is completely wrapped around what we do, and most of my ambitions are about breeding the best possible Herdwick sheep that I can. And if I ever, by luck or good management, manage to beat some of the shepherds that I admire, then that to me gives my life a lot of meaning. And yeah, and when they put me in a box, I'll have a smile on my face if I've done this for my whole life. I think there's a tendency in the modern world to look at a sheep and think, it's just a sheep. Sheep aren't all the same if you're a shepherd or you're from a culture like we're from. These sheep, when I look at them, they represent something really, really important, which is a continuity that runs back 4,000 or 5,000 years. And my keeping them going is part of a very long chain of effort that runs back through lots of hands and lots of eyes. And they're incredibly important. They're a symbol of what we are and what we do and why our lives matter. So to me, they're hugely important, and because I'm trying to breed some of the best ones, I'm looking at some of these ewes and they're pregnant at the moment, and I'm hoping that they're going to breed some of the best offspring I've ever had, and that will be what defines my status in front of my neighbours and my friends and my relatives and the other shepherds, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I love my way of life.